Today we are learning the inverse of a matrix. So to find the inverse, a symbol they can use is like the A is the matrix letter, so that can be any letter, and then to the -1. And this, when it's written like this, means the inverse of matrix A. Okay, so let's say that matrix A is just some matrix and its elements are A, B, C, D. If we want to find the inverse of matrix A, what we're going to do is we're going to first find the determinant, which we've learned previously, and we're going to do 1 over the determinant of matrix A. And then we do this rearranging of the elements. So here's how it goes every time. We take this element where A is and D is, and they switch locations. So D moves up here and A moves down here. And then these two elements stay where they're at, but they change signs. So whatever element B is, it switches signs, and element C switches signs. And that's how we find our inverse. And then because it is 1 over the determinant can't be equal to 0. If the determinant is equal to 0, then that means the inverse is not possible. Okay, so this says find the inverse of each matrix if possible. So the first thing I do is I find the determinant. And so remember that when you're finding the determinant, you're going to take these two numbers and multiply them. So 4 times 5. And then we are going to take these two numbers and multiply them. So 3 times 7. And then you subtract that. So 4 times 5 is 20. 3 times 7 is 21. 20 minus 21 is -1. So that's what the determinant equals. Okay, so just going to take that off real quick. All right. And so if we go back and now we try to rearrange the matrix. So remember, to find the inverse, you do 1 over the determinant. The determinant was -1. That goes right there. And that gets multiplied by, and now this is where we rearrange our matrix. So the 4 and the 5 have to switch places. So the 5 comes up here and the 4 comes down here. So remember, this is A and this is D. They change places. And then the B and the C switch signs. So the 7 stays where it's at but becomes negative. Same with the 3, stays where it's at but becomes negative. Now this right here, this is the same as -1. So when you multiply that in, you multiply it to everything. And so now you get -5, +7, +3, -4. And that's your answer. Let's try that again. So if we want to find the determinant of matrix B, remember you're multiplying 5 times 2, and then you do 3 times 4, and you subtract those. So we have 10 minus 12, so our determinant is -2. So to find the inverse of matrix B, you do 1 over the determinant, so -1/2, and then you do times, and this is where you rearrange your matrix. So A and D switch locations. So the 2 comes up here, the 5 goes down here. And that's A and D. And then B and C stay where they're at, but they change signs. If they're positive, they become negative. If they're negative, they become positive. Okay, now we've got to multiply through by this -1/2. So we're going to take the 2 times -1/2, that's -1. -3 times -1/2 is +3/2. -4 times -1/2 is +2. And then 5 times -1/2 is -5/2. And that's our inverse. All right, on C, so if we find the determinant, then we're going to do -6 times -3 and 2 times 9 and subtract them. So we get 18 minus 18, that's 0. So the inverse is not possible because the determinant of C equals 0. So the determinant equals 0, it cannot be done. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're trying to find, this is like saying that matrix A times matrix X equals matrix B. Now you can't divide by a matrix, so if we want to move matrix A, what we have to do is we have to do the inverse matrix. So we're going to take the inverse times the left side and the inverse times the right side. Now, why we do this is because the inverse of A times A cancels out. So it tells you that matrix X is the inverse of A times B. And you do it in that order. Okay, so let's figure this out together. So if we want to find the inverse of matrix A, first we need 1 over the determinant. So I'm going to find the determinant of A. Keep in mind, A is this 2, 7, 1, 4. All right, so the determinant is 2 times 4 and 1 times 7 and then subtract. So 8 minus 7, the determinant is 1. So that means we're taking 1 over 1 times, and this is where you rearrange the matrix when you're finding the inverse. So the 2 and the 4 switch locations, the 7 becomes negative, and the 1 becomes negative. All right, so since we're just multiplying through, 1 over 1 is just 1. So really, the 4, negative 7, negative 1, 2 is my inverse of A. All right, but now they said that to find X, we need to take inverse of A times B, and it has to be in that order. So when we're doing the inverse of A times matrix B, inverse of matrix A was this matrices we just found right here. And we're multiplying times matrix B, which is 2, 8, 1, 5. All right, that's going to get us a 2 by 2. So remember that when you take this row right here, it's times this column. So it's 4 times 2 plus negative 7 times 1. All right, and so that is 1. And then I'm going to take that top row times the second column. So I'm going to do 4 times 8 plus negative 7 times 5. All right, that's 32 minus 35, so that's negative 3. You could use a calculator, though. All right, for the bottom row, I'm going to take this bottom row, negative 1, 2, times the first column. So negative 1 times 2, 2 times 1. All right, that's 0. And then I'm going to take the bottom row times the second column. All right, which that's 2. And that is my answer right there. Okay, let's go ahead and give that one more go. So this is matrix A, and this is matrix B. And so to find X, we want, because we have A times X equals B, we want to multiply both sides by inverse of matrix A. Notice how I put the inverse of matrix A first and then times matrix B. That order does matter. All right, first let's find the inverse of matrix A. So remember, we're going to do 1 over the determinant. All right, the determinant of A is 2 times 0 minus 3 times 5. So 0 minus 15, so it's negative 15. All right. And then times, we've got to rearrange matrix A. The 2 and the 0 switch locations. The 3 and the 5 switch sides. All right, so that is going to be 0 times negative 1 over 15 is just 0. And if we do negative 3 times negative 1 over 15, you get 3 over 15, which is 1/5. And if I do negative 5 times negative 1 over 15, I get 5 over 15, which is 1/3. And then I get negative 2 over 15. All right, so that looks like a mess, but that's the inverse of matrix A. So we're going to take that. And we're going to multiply it times matrix B. Okay, so it's a 2 by 2 by a 2 by 2, so it's going to create another 2 by 2. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do this top row times this first column. So I'm doing 0 times 3 plus 1/5 times 0. That just gets me 0. All right, I'm going to do the top row times the second column. So I get 0 times 12 plus 1/5 times 15. All right, that gets me 3. And I'm going to do the bottom row times the first column. 1/3 times 3 plus negative 2/15 times 0. So 1/3 times 3 is 1, and then that 0 makes the 2/5 go away. And then I'm going to do the bottom row times the second column. 1/3 times 12 plus negative 2/15 times 15. All right, and that gets me, you could use a calculator here. That gets me 2. And that's my answer for matrix B.